So I just want to thank everybody for participating in the Slack presentation or the Slack channels. There seems to be a lot of activity and a lot of wishing that people had actually taken the week off. I'm really curious and hope that you guys can actually provide some input about whether this was people had actually taken the week off. If, I'm really curious and hope that you guys can. Sorry about that. I'm really curious to see if you guys actually had input into whether we had actually taken on too much for the hackathon, or whether the pacing was okay. So please provide some feedback in the Slack channel so that we can plan future events a little bit better. Or if this is if all of this content at once is useful, then it'd be interesting to know that as well. I'm hoping that we can move to Gnome soon. He's going to be presenting on service pages and requests, as well as exposing PNX and user data. So we seem to be having some technical problems with him connecting right now. So actually, he just bounced out again. But I'm hoping that that folks will be able to contribute other topics to the lightning round that's happening tomorrow. We have a few discussion topics that are already available. Things like how to work with the autocomplete customization. There's another question about what's the best way to use GitHub. And there's a third question about using NPM. So it sounds like there are many things that are coming from Ulrich's presentation. It would be useful to also hear if the customization framework is something that works for people, or if there are other enhancements that might be available. I'm going to switch to Gnome in a second, and then he can get started with his presentation. So thanks, everybody.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, actually, today is a very interesting presentation, I hope, where we're gonna discuss. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. We're gonna discuss basically some user some session information you can use in your customized directives, and PNX data available for you in your customization. And in general, I'm gonna show you. It's really how I like to work inside the customization environment. I hope some ideas you would take and use yourself. Maybe you will have some better ideas for me on my workflow. But let's start with the presentation, and we'll see how it goes. So the first slide here, I'm gonna describe just in general the session flow, what happens when a guest user comes into the system. So the first thing that the system needs in order to start the new UI session is really the configuration for the view that the user is going to use. So a REST API called configuration with the parameter of the actual view that is inside the URL. That's why, by the way, when you use your development environment, you always need to put an actual VID in the URL, because then and only then the configuration REST API will actually work, because it needs that VID. The response of the configuration REST API will hold the, uh, among other things, the authentication profile. Um, and then the Primo will use this authentication profile and access another REST API that returns a guest JWT. A JWT is actually a JSON web token. It's a known standard, and it will hold the basic session information that Primo needs to go on. Later on, if a guest user decides to sign in, then it does that, and in the response from the sign-in procedure, we will get a new JWT. It's a very long token. I shortened it with additional information for you, logged in user. The only way to produce a JWT is with the Primo server. Just the Primo server is the only one that can produce them. That protects the ability for anyone to like fire out REST APIs to get loans or personal information on users. So the Primo server, once authenticated a user, is the only one that can issue him a JWT, and by that return data for his information. So once the system has a JWT, what it does, it uses client services, mainly the user session manager service, which uses other utilities and services. But what it basically does, it takes that JWT and puts it in the session storage, save it in the client, and it then attaches it as a header to each and every REST API call we make to the server. That way, the server will always know who made the request, but no one else can forge this JWT and really trick the server to think it's someone else. So if we go to the Primo, to my development environment working against the Primo demo server, and I'm just gonna go into the network tab in the developer tools and create and start a guest session all over again. You will see, if I look at the network tab, this right here is the REST API I talked about getting the configuration. Using the preview tab in the developer tools, you can see very nicely the response from the server. In this case, the authentication section is the one we're interested in. There are many configuration here you can use, but this is the authentication profile. In this case, it's PDS. So then Primo, the next step, will use this configuration of the authentication token to get. Let's do that all over again. Oops. It will then fire out a REST API call to the guest JWT service, and the response will be this long token, which is the JSON web token. So now, if I perform a search, even if I'm a guest, and I go here and look for the REST API for the search, you will see that the request has an header for authorization. This is the JWT token. Okay, so every REST API will now send this JWT. So If I go back to the presentation and I just define like a made up user story to create a directive, a functionality that will add like a contact card when clicking on the username, on a link near the username. What I will have to do, and that's really to continue the sessions from yesterday, I will have to add a button under the username, meaning I will have to tap into the, if I remember correctly, the user area after directive. I will tap into it. The button will open a dialog box. And once it's opened, the dialog box, it will fetch information from that JWT we just saw. It will do that by accessing, again, everything is done by accessing the parent controller, okay, like you saw yesterday. And I will get the JWT service to fetch the actual JWT and use it to display some information. The features, some of the features, the two first directives I'm going to show you today really are tools for you to see the entire amount of data available for you in each directive. Of course, when you want to develop a very simple functionality, you won't need the entire data as I will show it, but it will show you, first of all, how I like to work and the possibilities that you can explore using this data. So as I said, to do that, I need to tap into the user area after directive. Okay, it's right here. You see, I already did it. So you see here, I added this link. So if I go to my development environment, you will see here in the JS folder, I have many JavaScript files. I'm just going to open up by saying that I do that to really separate my code into very small directives and services that we're going to talk about, knowing that every JS file inside the JS directory will eventually be concatenated and create a custom JS file. Once I'm working not directly on the custom JS file, I need to be aware of that everything in the custom JS file will keep getting overridden by the other files. So very important file, again, in this folder, if I work that way, is the custom module.js, because I want to have this definition inside my custom JS file. I need to have it in one of the files here so it won't get overridden every time I change it. So that's, in general, just goes to the way I'm going to show you how I develop the features today. But going back to the user area after directive, this is the file, and you can see it only holds the controller and component from the PRM user area after. It's very minimal in that way. It just has the controller and the component defined in the same way you saw yesterday. I'm tapping into the PRM user area after directive, so I'm putting its ID here. I'm defining a controller to work with it. Okay, and I give it whatever name I want. And I have a template. This template, as I showed you in the, I'm just seeing now, are you seeing my screen clearly? Because it looks a little...
It looks a little blurry.
It looks blurry. That's not good. I'm gonna try to hang out and try to connect again with maybe a better bandwidth.
Oh, wait, hold on a second. It's good for other people, though.
Oh.
So people are chiming in on the YouTube chat, and they say it's fine. It's just a little pixelated.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna continue. If it's...
I think what happens is that when you're moving around a lot, the refresh takes a little while.
Oh. I do that a lot, so I'm gonna try to not do that
Just take
that
it a
much.
little slower.
Yeah. So this is the actual directive. We have an MD button on the end that has an ngClick attribute that activates the open dialog user card uh, uh, function in the controller. Okay, but the nice thing here is if we look at the function open dialog user card, all it does is these two very simple lines. It creates a JSON object and then it opens a dialog. And how is that achieved? Well, what I did here is I use services. And services are great because they allow you to really reuse your functionality among many directives or even many packages. How do I do that? In this case, the first service I wanted to define is the service, the actual service to get the JWT data from the appropriate place in the system. So I created a new file called Primo Explore User Info Service right here. Creating a service is very easy. All you need to do, much like you did in the controller and directive, just define a service on the app, give it an ID, in this case, user info service. And inside it, you just need to know, and that's the difficult part, you need to know where to go to get the actual JWT information. There's no easy way to know where exactly everything will be in the system. So what I tend to do is after I define my directive, even if I didn't write any code yet, I go to the developer tools, I look for the custom.js file, and I look for the PRM user area after definition. I just add a breakpoint at the first or second line, doesn't really matter, before I did anything. And then I can, again, refresh the page. The breakpoint will stop. And now, whether I look at this variable or the VM, I can see the parent controller we always talk about. So instead of reloading in debug mode and focusing on an element, I just add the directive and I add a breakpoint. I just stop at the beginning. Now I can open the parent controller and I can see all of the available properties and services and functions. So if it's not the first time you're listening to this subject, you know we encourage you to use only properties because we know we can maintain them backwards compatible over time. Um, but in this, because other things we have are functions that maybe will change over time. We'll add additional parameters, so it's not completely safe to use them. And we also have services attached to directives. Just like I, in my directive, use services, the developers here in Primo use services in their own directives. So you have them here. To be more specific, you have here the user session manager service. This is the one we want. How do I know that? Exploring the basically you can explore the source code, looking how the user area actually works and where it takes the information from, or just explore here the services to see that the user session manager service has the JWT service that has the JWT helper. Sometimes it's pretty long to get there. And it has a function called decode token. Now I'm cheating a little bit because I just said we can't use functions. It's not that we can't use them, but we will try to avoid that. I'll explain later what the decode token is. A fair gamble to use it, and it will be okay. But that what I did now is really the annoying part, trying to find where the data is. So for that reason, using services and really going through the pain of finding the information just once, then slapping it into a service, and then knowing you have a service that helps you access the data you want every time. Or maybe if someone else created that service and put it out in GitHub, then you can use it. You can use it from there. So that's a big upside of using services. Just writing the code once and using it many times. So once I know where the data is, I can write the service. In this case, the user info service. You can see here I created a function called get decoded token. It just goes through the same process I just showed you in the debug window. It gets the JWT util service and gets the decoded token. That's the activation of the function that I told you is a little bit on the uh, risky side because it's a function, but since it doesn't have any parameters in it, it's a simple getter function, it's fairly reasonable to use it. You don't have to use it. There are other ways to get this information, but I think it's fairly safe to use it. So now I have a service that returns me the decoded token. If I go back to the directive, I can see here I fetch the decoded token from the user info service, okay? And then I used another service to describe it, enable it, described it. It's just a pretty print for an object and enables you to display it more nicely in the interface. This gives me a JSON object. Then I use a third service, the dialog service right here, and I'm using a method in it called open dialog to open a nice dialog with the JSON object. So I have a service to get information. I have a service to make it nice, and which is the service to get it nice. The describe is pretty general. You can use it all over the system. And I have a general service to open a dialog. This really simplifies my controller code to just calling different services I created in the system. Just to add that in order to use services, you need to inject them into the controller like I did here. Here's the dialog service, here's the JSON helper, and here's the user info service. I have to inject them and then use them, okay? So I'm just gonna show how it works, and then I think we're gonna have to stop for questions, I guess, to see if I was clear. So I logged in now, and I'm clicking the user card, and I'm gonna get this dialog with, this is the JSON that I got from the JWT service. I just made it a bit nicer so it will be presented. You can see here, you see the expiration of the session, the username, its group and group ID, institution, the institution of the view, and my IP here. The preferred language for this user, and so on. So this directive is just to expose you to the information that you have and you can use, for example, to access other APIs with the username to get additional information using the JWT. Again, the only reason why I can see this information is it's because I logged into the system. You, of course, cannot access information of other logged in users in the same way. And you can see here, I don't have the really personal information is not here, just the username, which is already presented here anyway. So so going back to the just generally explaining about the directive. The directive is defined in this file here. It has a template that activates a function here. The function activates 3 services: to get the data, to prettify it, and to open a dialog to display it. The files are the directive file and the services file. All are JavaScript files separated into separate files here in the JS directory. So before I go on to the next slide, maybe we'll stop for questions. I'm actually looking at the YouTube channel. I'm not seeing questions there. Maybe I'll go into Slack.
I actually got a private question about exposing barcodes of patrons.
Yeah,
If that's included as part of the user info.
no, barcode are like passwords, I guess.
No, well, I mean, they may be treated like passwords, but
Yeah. Primo
they're
doesn't. It's great that Primo doesn't know it. The UI doesn't know this information, because when you log in, you go into a different system. You send her the credentials. The only thing the UI gets back is this JWT that the server created. We can't decode the encrypted information that was typed in earlier. So it's just and I think that's good, I think, because we don't want what's available in the client will be available for anyone that just hacks your computer. So we don't want this private information exposed in the client. So if that's the barcode is something from Voyager, if I remember correctly.
Voyager or Aleph.
Yeah. So basically no, because you will have to go and log in via PDS, for example, and once you typed it, it's gone. It's not in a client anymore.
So that would.
Primo in general doesn't hold this information.
So the point is that would be a lookup in another system.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that system will expose those either. Maybe just for those APIs are usually protected by allowing just a certain IP to query a certain proxy IP to query this information. So you will probably will have to go through a proxy server. But
okay. There are a couple of other questions in the YouTube channel. Bernardo Gomez asks, how do you get the value for is guest or is logged in?
well, there are methods you can use, but again, probably a better idea is to implement your own method. In this case, you can just ask, I guess, not sure you have here information enough for making that decision, but I can look it up. The logic. One of these. Let's see. Let's do that. If I go and again, I'm gonna stop here and refresh. I mean, I guess I know the answer, but let's just do that. User session manager service. has oops. Mhm. I'll have to look it up for how we do it. My guess is just getting the same information we saw, and I'm just going to open it up. And if you're logged in, you'll have a user and username. If I log out, you probably have like guest in there. So that's one way to do that. But I'll look up the best way later to actually give you the best answer.
One method that Ulrich took yesterday was to look at the username, and if the username was greater than 0 characters,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
something
I
like
guess
that.
that. Yeah, that's okay.
Um, let's hold on just a second. So Alexander Cooper, I think, can Bernard is asking, can you log out and actually see what the user ID is for guest?
Log out. After you log out, we clear the JWT from the session, so it's not there anymore. You get a
Right,
new JWT for guest.
right.
Yeah. In
Um,
time, whether there's a timeout or you change your view or anything like that, we get rid of it.
the other question was Alexander Cooper asking a little bit more about the barcode question. I think it was related to kind of um, how one would look that up, but it sounds like that would actually be another.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the barcode is actually if it's as exposed as the username. If it's not like a secret information, and we have, let's face it, if we use it to access Voyager to get the loans, then it's probably in the client. I'm not sure what the barcode is, but if it's safe to use it, then it will be there. I'm just the terminology. I'm not sure what the barcode. If it's like a username, an additional username, or it's like a.
Well, in Voyager,
It's the same as the username. Then I think it will be there. It will be another. Once I log in as a Voyager user, you will see that in the because Primo needs it as well. So
yeah.
and it's not a secret. So I guess it will be there.
Okay.
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 So yeah.
Any other questions? So yeah, we just have more comments about barcodes.
Yeah.
Basically saying that barcode is a user ID in the system,
Yeah.
and
So I'm pretty sure it's there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Ulrich asks a question: is a JWT token shared across multiple front-end servers?
No, it's per se. It's like in the classic UI, you had a session that expired after half an hour. The JWT simulates the exact same thing. It's not. It's on the client, so there's no. It's not. It's created on the server. It's downloaded to a client. If you use it from another client against the same save server, you will be.
Oh, it appears that Noam dropped off. He's reconnecting in a second.
To another server.
You back on? It appears you dropped out.
I think we got hung out somehow.
Okay, hold on just a second. You may have to reshare your desktop, Noam.
Okay.
Another question that's come in, the information coming from Alma in Lightboxes, how could we add or modify it? Talking about the get it one, get it two, and my account stuff eShelf. So I think this is kind of going to some of the other demos that we have a little bit later. Really talking more about the service and request.
Yeah. That's a good question. Happy I don't have to answer. Yeah, my account should be an eShelf. Shouldn't be a problem. Just the Alma in a Lightbox, which I'm not sure what's the meaning. But okay, let's save it for later.
Mm-hmm.
So going forward, I'm going to talk a little same idea, but I'm going to talk about the PNX data. So when I perform a search in the new UI, I actually fire out a REST API for the PNX's API with the query and additional information. I get a response with the records matching the query. I have later on some additional services that to complete the services on the record, like snippets and so on. So if I go to the system again and in the network tab, watch as I search, you will see that the search here, the response, again, you can see I sent the JWT on the request, but if I take a look at the preview, I see the response is has some very interesting information. The info part is really general info, pretty obvious, the set of results and the total number of them. But the most interesting parts are, of course, you have the facets, and you have highlights that we added in November, which mean like for every field. Are you seeing my screen now? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. For every field, what are the highlighted terms that need to be highlighted? In this case, my search wasn't that interesting, so it's all water. And the main part is the docs section that has an entry for each and every result. Let's take the first one for example. We have here the PNX that you already know from the classic UI. It's the actual model we have in the database that was loaded from the ILS. The disadvantages that you suffered from in the classic UI of having the PNX by calling the show PNX servlet was that some of the fields are really not display ready. Some of the logic was not that we run in the server to get the availability status, to populate the link templates, was not really reflected in the actual PNX because it's just the database representation. So if I go into the link section, I just see those template codes that doesn't actually help me at all. So now in addition to the PNX that you can use and you should use if you want to communicate with the server and tell him, save me this PNX, or here's my PNX, do something with it. But Besides that, if you want to display information, really usable information from the result, you will probably find it in the delivery section. You can see here that everything that we actually display on the screen came from mostly the delivery section. We have the status, the availability status, and we have the holding array with the actual holding information split it out into separate fields, not having all of these $I and $L subfields. Really nice, ready to use information. And the link section with already calculated links with the actual values you can use. So that's a big help for you really exploring this section and using it for your own implementations. And what I did here in a pretty similar way to what I did in the user card is I created like before I do that, I created a directive right here at the end of every brief result with buttons for different information you can fetch from the result. And you can, if you observe the code later or now as I present it, you will see that every JSON object you feed the directive with, it will create like a nice representation of it and add a button. It's not a usable feature for your library, but it's usable for you when you want to fetch your information for your development. So if I go back to my code, I'm actually tapping into the Primo Explore results container after. That's a directive that will appear after each and every result in the page. So again, I'm defining a component with a template. It's quite long, but it's just the 4 buttons that we saw on the screen. And I have a controller which is pretty slim because all we do in the template is activate the open dialog PNX function, and we send it each and every time. We send it a different JSON we want to expose. First one is for PNX, second one is for delivery, third one is for enrichment, and the last one is for the link section. So, and you can just create more and more buttons like this for every section you want to just explore or display, and it doesn't have to be a full JSON. It can be for a specific field in a JSON. So, and again, all it does is it uses the JSON helper service we created before. So that's the first time we can see that creating a service for one directive is really usable in another directive pretty fast. So I'm again creating a JSON object from the item I got from the template, and I again use the open dialog function in the dialog service to present it in a dialog. So if I click on this button, I'm getting the PNX information, split it into objects and functions and string values. Same thing for the delivery. You see, I have a Boolean type, I have a string type, I have an object. So every time I have an object, I can just take its name and refeed it to the same mechanism to get this pretty complex object, split it out into a more understandable format. And the links, just to show the links as another example. The links is just an array of links. So really the amount of information that's available for every result using the item which holds the PNX and the delivery is pretty vast. So I guess that once we create the Primo Explore PNX service, it will have a lot of getter methods to get specific stuff from these JSON. This is it for this example. I think I'm going to show the last one and then
Boolean
stop again.
type, string type, I have an object. So every time I have an object, I can just take it.
Oh, I'm hearing myself now. That's weird. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and we'll have time for questions after I finish the last example. And then again, I created a user story to use the information we just saw in the PNX. So the story is I wanna add a map with the item locations to the full view for each and every location I have there. So what I will have to do, I will have to locate or tap into the locations after item location item after directive. I'm going to define it. I'm going to use the property for the current chosen location. We're going to see it in a minute. And I'm gonna map. I just did it a mock-up for it. I'm gonna map the libraries to GPS coordinates. I'm gonna fetch the coordinates from that map, and I'm gonna display a Google map using the coordinates. So the directive is, as I said, the Primo Explore locations item after. Okay. Again, the template here is the simplest one so far because all it has is an iframe that presents a link that will be evaluated in the controller. So this is just a very simple template. The method here to create the link called getLink, okay? All it does, it uses from the parent controller the current location. This is how it's called. Again, it could be the best way, I think, to understand what's inside your directive is just add a breakpoint here and find the information you want to use. It's fairly easy. If it's information inside the directive, it's more complicated if you need to access more and more services for more general information. In this case, it was pretty easy because right on the directive, you had the current location. Creating a link here using the get coordinates method, which just uses the call number and the library code to fetch like mockup information I put here to coordinates I took from Google Maps. And if I go to the full view of an example I created, and if anyone, oh, just a minute. So these are the locations. And remember, I tapped into the locations item directive, which is not active yet. When will it be active? Once I go drill down into one of the locations. If I go into the first one, then I can see the iframe I added down here. And I used coordinates from with the University of Nottingham. If anyone is online from there, then thank you very much for mapping your library into Google Maps. So it's very nice. So the examples here are of specific made up call numbers inside the library. If I go back and switch a location, I will of course get a different, the same map, but a different pin on the same map for a different location. So if the first two examples were not actually usable features because they were very general, they were just ways to demonstrate the power of services and the amount of data that can be fetched from those services. The third example, this example is a feature, and you can see that when you use to implement a feature is basically easy because you don't need too much data. You just need this. The only thing I took from the parent controller is the current location, and then I passed it for the call number and library code, and from that on, it's pretty simple. It's nothing I did. It's all Google. So this was the last example. So now I guess I'm free to take some questions. Let's see.
So, Noam, one of the questions that was posted is if these services are going to be available as modules.
The ones I just showed you?
Demonstrated, or will they be available in GitHub?
Well, it's a I think the best way for sure for now will be that we should probably, and if the idea gets accepted, we should create a GitHub project called, let's say, Primo Explore Services. And then each and every one of us, if we create a directive and we need a special service to get the user information, to get the location information, we just add it to that GitHub repository and use it as a dependency. That way, I think pretty fast we'll get a nice coverage of the information needed for every directive you will need. So that will save, I guess, a lot of time to many of us if we just use a simple GitHub repository for all the services implemented, and probably every directive you will develop will have a dependency to this repository or npm package, making it, I think, maintain better, really avoid duplication, someone developing a service that was already developed. In general, if someone really likes a service he saw on the source code, because you can access our source code, and you see the JWT service is great as is, it can be copied, pasted into a separate service, added to the GitHub, and then anyone can use it. It won't break, it won't change, because because just the community can change it. There's no fear of being backwards compatible. So once we have this project running, I think it will build itself into a very nice usable services package for everyone.
I'm not seeing any other questions in Slack. Somebody asked if today's presentation was going to be posted in Slack or in GitHub.
I did post my my presentation from 2 days ago in Slack, so I think I'll do the same here. I'm not sure my directives and services are really mature enough to go into GitHub, but so I'm gonna just pin them to the Slack, and people can play with them. I have no problem with adding them to GitHub. It's not.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then we will conclude for today, and then we'll continue the conversation on Slack. So I want to thank everybody for participating. Noam, thank you for presenting. And tomorrow will basically be a discussion of lightning round, as well as some talks about different types of features or other types of things that the user community is interested in. And I'm hoping that if people are interested in working in similar features, we can actually join up into teams to code these features as opposed to rolling our own things. So, so I thank everybody, and see you in Slack today.